Good day, I'm Herbert Kaplow in San Francisco. Sexual abuse of children is a problem that hasn't received a lot of public attention, at least partly because it's often covered up. And yet its incidence is believed to be of major proportions. Authorities estimate that unless conditions change significantly, at least one of every 4 girls will become a victim of sexual assault by the age of 18. There aren't as many boy victims, but there too, the magnitude of the problem probably is larger than we've thought. With us today to discuss this problem are Dr. Henry Giarretto, Executive Director of Parents United in San Jose, California, a group providing therapy for both incest victims and offenders. Doris Stevens, Director of the Sexual Assault Center of the University of Washington's Harborview Medical Center, and Eugene Brown, Sergeant in the Sexual Assault Investigation Unit of the San Jose Police Department. Folks, welcome to Directions. Ms. Stevens, what is sexual assault of children?
Well, sexual assault generally comprises a lot of different acts. Basically, they're all situations in which sexual activity is forced on one person by another person, either by use of force, threat of force, or in the case of children, bribery, sheer use of the power differential. It encompasses a whole range of acts physically, and it happens to older people, younger people, people of all ages, men as well as women.
And its effect on the victims?
Well, with almost all victims, whether they're adults who've been assaulted by strangers or whether they're children who are molested by someone they know, there is a real sense of fear and terror that often happens in relation to these things. If it goes on over a long period of time, there's severe loss of self-esteem, bad feelings are created within that person. There can be a lot of anger that develops. It can have a severe effect on a person's relationships with other people.
Is there any generally accepted form of therapy?
Everyone pretty much agrees now who's working in this area that there need to be services directed for victims so that they can indeed become survivors, that they can get past this and go on with their lives. Therapy that in some way supports them, lets them understand or helps them understand that this sexual abuse, assault was not their fault, that the behavior that caused these problems for them really is the responsibility of someone else, that they are not alone, that there are other people who have gotten through this, that they can put this behind them, put it in perspective, and get on with living their lives.
Sergeant Brown, sexual assault generally is perceived as a crime. Is there a general way that the law across this nation treats this phenomenon?
We like to get people involved in the complete immersion in the criminal justice system with penalties involved in this, because we found that not only does the victim need to have the offender punished, the offender, we found through treating and prosecuting a number of them, have told us that they needed to be punished themselves. And I think equally important is that society needs to have these people punished. Otherwise, society is condoning the acts that they did. And it's through the punishment mode, through the criminal justice system, letting the punishment fit the crime, that we start with a clean slate and start rehabilitating both the victim and the perpetrator.
I believe that the sentences across the country can range all the way up to something like 50 years in jail. Is that not so?
That's correct. That varies from state to state.
That would not seem to be rehabilitative, though.
No, I think that is a destructive thing to do, taking an offender who has molested his daughter, even to the point of intercourse, and if you put him in prison for 10 or 15 years, the only thing that you have when he comes out is an animal then who has spent 10 to 15 years in prison, and this is also, I think, probably contributed to the destruction of the victim too, because she loves this person.
Dr. Giarretto, as I understand it, incest is probably the largest single component of sexual abuse of children.
Well, in my view, it's the most destructive. We treat all kinds, incidentally, of sexual abuse, even outside.
At Parents United.
Parents United. Now, I also want you to know that Parents United is just one part of a total treatment package, which includes individual, family counseling. For example, we involve siblings too, the entire family, because it reflects back what Jean just said, that when a youngster reports, she feels that this is the end of her family, and we reconstruct the family if it's at all possible, because we know that's in the best interest of the child. So we have to treat the entire family, including the father offender.
A little while ago, we tape recorded briefly some experiences of a couple of people I believe you have worked
Right.
with. One is a mother of a child, the wife of a husband who molested, I believe, two of the daughters. And we also spoke with a child, not this woman's child, but another child who at the age of 9 was, as she tells us, molested by her stepfather. What happened?
I think I was about 9 years old when my father first approached me. A lot of times in the very beginning, it just started with the hugging that was okay, watching TV, where he'd put his arm around me, and gradually it led into fondling and intercourse, and it happened from the time I was 9 till I was 13. When it first started, I didn't realize what he was doing was wrong, and I thought that this must happen in all families, because my family was the model family. My parents were the model parents. All my friends called them Mom and Dad, and my parents were the ones that were involved in taking the kids to Little League and brownie leaders and everything, so it had to be okay. And I think I was in 6th grade, and I told a girlfriend, or we all were talking about boys and stuff, and they mentioned sex, and that was the time I realized that it wasn't happening in other families. And then I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to turn to. I couldn't tell my mom. I was afraid I would tear the family apart. I didn't know what to expect.
Why did you realize then that it seemed to be wrong?
Because the other girls weren't having sex with their fathers, and they were talking about kissing boys, and I'd been, sleeping with my father since I was 9 years old. And I didn't like it. Even in the beginning, I didn't like it. But I was always told that, I was real confused. He told me that it was all right and it was okay and don't worry about it. And then he would turn around and say, but this is our little secret and don't tell Mommy or she won't, because she won't believe you or it'll get Daddy in trouble. And that was the last thing I wanted to do, was make problems. So it went on, and I started resisting more and more, and he got more and more protective of me. And I don't know. Finally, I was fed up with it. I was a real good student in school, and I didn't act out until after I had reported it. I finally told my mom when I was in 7th grade, with the help of my older sister. And she immediately believed me. And we didn't know what to do, but she believed me, and that was that was a load off my shoulders. I think if I wouldn't have had my mom's support, I would have just been a basket case. I went through therapy, and I remember the first time I went in, I was scared to death because I thought I was the only one that had ever been molested. And I walked in there, and there were 10 or 15 other girls sitting there, and they were laughing and smiling, and I thought, that's just, I thought, how could they laugh after something like this? And they told me, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. And it was tough, but I made it, and I'm a survivor.
And you, as a mother and as a wife?
Oh, how do I begin? Listening to the story of a daughter brings back all the feelings that I had about not protecting my own children. I have 2 daughters, one 16 and one 12. It was my son, ironically, who told me. His sister had confided in him, and he was the one who came and told me that his 16-year-old sister had been molested for years. It was not going on with her, at that time, and he did not know about his 12-year-old sister. So when I talked with my daughters, they confirmed it. And the pain and the feelings that I didn't protect them, that it happened right there in my own home, and I didn't know, and it went on for years, and I didn't know. It was just incredible. We confronted my husband, and when he went to seek help, psychiatric help, we all found out that it had to be reported to the police. That's when we got in touch with Parents United, and that's when our therapy began and our growth began, and we began to realize that we could be okay again, all of us. But it's been a long, hard struggle. I think we're all coming out of it much better than we were when we went in. When it all happened, years ago, I've been married for 14 years now, I knew that my marriage wasn't as satisfying as I had maybe hoped it would be, or had always been told or felt it would be. I knew that my husband didn't get out of it as much as he wanted, and I knew I didn't, but I looked around me and I saw other marriages that didn't seem to be any better. Mine didn't seem to be any worse than most. We too were a model family. All of the children in the neighborhood called us Mom and Dad. They all preferred to congregate at our house. We spent a lot of time with our children. The children seemed to love and respect and care a great deal for their father. Above all other things, he seemed to be a good father. And I think in all other respects he was. And he molested his children.
In both these cases, Dr. Giarretto, I believe they were treated by Parents United.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, again, Parents United is just one element in a total treatment package. When a family comes in, it goes to a coordinator, usually out of Child Protective Services, then the family is sent to a supervising counselor, and he makes sure that the youngster and the mother primarily get principal attention, because I believe that you can't rebuild a family unless you strengthen the mother-daughter core. Now, as that becomes stronger, then they start thinking of the father, not as an offender, but as a father and husband. If the mother and father are against the child, then some terrible things happen to the child because she feels absolutely desolate. So we concentrate on the mother-daughter core. Then if the wife and husband want to maintain that relationship, we do marriage counseling. Eventually we do family counseling. The siblings are very important. Now,
as I understand it, there is some disagreement within the community of psychologists, sociologists, whomever handle this, as to how you treat victims of incest. And I believe there is even what I read somewhere was sort of an underground consensus that in some situations incest may not be harmful, that in fact may be positive. Dr. Stevens, what is that? How significant a sentiment is that in the community?
Well, I hope it's not too significant. I have read some of the writings by people who would like us to believe that the problems are really caused in child sexual abuse by those of us professionals who try to intervene and make things worse. In my experiences and that of my staff, I simply cannot see where the evidence for that is, either in the research that's been done or in our clinical experience. Even though a child may care very much for the person who has molested her, there is never a child who comes in and says, I really enjoyed this going on. She at the very least, is relieved that this has been stopped, she or he, and wants to go on from there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Doris. We've treated over 4,000 families, and we have thousands of letters on file from women who molested as children, who incidentally we also treat, and not one of them have said, listen, Hank, you're all wet. I really enjoyed this relationship with my father. It's exploitation.
Herb, to further show, I think, some of the ridiculousness of some of this coming out, I won't honor the society by this name, but one of them's motto is, sex after 8 is too late. Now that explains the thinking or the lack of thinking of some of these people.
Sergeant Brown, We are talking about treating the offender too in Dr. Giarretto's approach and the approach, I assume, of others who agree with your general approach. But there are also these penalties. I visited Dr. Giarretto's center a few days ago, and somebody stood up, a man stood up and said, if I hadn't been treated here, I could be spending 15 years in jail. How do you as a policeman handle that? How does the law handle it, and how has your approach maybe changed over the years? Do these people go to jail or not?
Well, it has changed over the years. When I first started it about 15 years ago, I thought they should all go to prison. I do think the penalty should fit the crime. I like to quote Maurice Masterlink, or paraphrase him, when he said, I have never for one instant been able to clearly see within myself. How then would you have me judge the deeds of others? I think that they should be punished. There's no doubt in my mind, and you can talk to the offenders themselves, and they will tell you that they needed to be punished. Otherwise, they're playing a game with themselves.
How are they punished in San Jose?
Some of them go to state prison, depending on the seriousness of the crime and depending on their cooperation with the program. Others usually get up to anywhere from straight probation, which I feel is unfortunate, because I think all of them should spend some time in jail. So this goes from a straight probation up to a maximum of 1 year in the county jail. Usually it runs from 30 to 60 to 90 days in jail on the work furlough program, with a good lasting probation hold on the condition that they actively, in good faith, seek counseling and treatment. And if they don't, then they're wrapped up and they can go to state prison as a result of this.
Dr. Giarretto, how typical were those stories that we heard a little while ago of the mother and the
Well,
child?
I've heard that, you know, at least, you know, as I say, 3,000 or 4,000 times. The severity of the molest, of course, varies from touching to full penetration, oral copulation, and in all cases, the youngster is damaged. I do want to insist, though, that if you treat the child and her family, and in particular, you get the father to take full responsibility, prognosis is very good. Gene gets, for example, about 90% confession rate, don't you, Gene?
Yes.
Yeah.
Confession rate?
Yeah, which is, you know, extraordinary, because denial is what most fathers fall back on. And I think I want to back up something that Gene said, but maybe modify it a little bit. If you are too punitive, then they won't come forward, because the youngster feels responsible. We had 30 cases in 1971 when I first started. Now we're getting 800 referrals. And the only difference is that we give a message of hope to the youngster and the mother. The family doesn't have to be destroyed.
I agree. This is one situation, one social problem where the criminal justice system and mental health people have to work hand in hand. We've found also in Seattle there's virtually no treatment that happens for offenders unless the criminal justice system insists on it. But in many communities around the country, the criminal justice system is too punitive or is not set up to cooperate in this way. We've worked very hard to make those two things work together for the benefit of everyone in the family.
Remember that the offender here is the average guy on the street out there in TV land, and they love their daughters. They are not the criminal type. They want to work with the system, and they will if given the chance.
And they do not come from any special group. They're not rich or poor or any...
That's right. They come from all walks of life. I've had the misfortune of investigating everything from doctors to police officers to people who had absolutely nothing. And it's really a cross-section of society.
Ms. Stevens, you talked about Seattle. I understand that part of the program up there is just sort of a public information program. Is that
That's right.
And we have an example of a promotional spot prepared for television, which I guess has been playing in Seattle, which we're going to show. It includes Bill Russell, who was the former basketball star, talking to some children. Let's look at it for a moment.
What would you do if someone that you knew tried to touch you in private areas of your body?
I'd yell and scream and tell them not to, and then run.
Okay. And what would you do?
I'd say no. I'd tell my dad. I'd tell the police. I'd call them on the telephone and tell them that somebody had been messing with me. I tell my mom.
And what if you told your mom and your dad and they didn't believe you?
I'd tell a relative or a good friend's mom or dad.
What would you do if someone said they wanted you to do something that wasn't right, but they wanted you to keep it a secret?
I say I would, but I really wouldn't.
If someone is touching the private areas of your body, you can make them stop. Just tell someone. Tell everyone. If they don't listen, tell them they'll have to deal with me. All 6 feet 9 inches.
What's been the reaction to that television spot? Anything specific?
Well, it's been a very good reaction. In the short term, prevention is going to happen by letting children and their families be informed about the problem of sexual abuse before it happens, and letting children know they do have a right to say no. They don't have to have their bodies or minds messed with if they don't want to. And here's someone who has great stature in their eyes who's telling them that's okay.
Is there resistance to discussing this in a public forum?
Well, it was at the beginning. You know, in 1971, nobody would even listen to the word incest. They draw away from you in revulsion. Now that programs like Doris's and mine, which were the pioneer programs, it's discussed pretty generally. I just want to say one thing about what Doris said in terms of prevention. Not only do you stop the immediate crime, then you stop those children from molesting their children, because we've discovered that a large proportion, for example, I know that 95% of our fathers have been either sexually, physically, or emotionally abused.
They themselves were victims.
Exactly. So now...
of incestual abuse.
Right. And so this is how you stop cross-generational incest, because you see, you'll find that many of these families have a long history of it.
And I heard earlier that also a large number of prostitutes have been found. Mm-hmm. Have you found that, Sergeant Brown?
Yes. I personally been involved in, I worked vice for a number of years before I went into this, and I've talked to a lot of them. Prostitutes and runaway females, and runaway males for that matter, are quite often involved. The large majority of the time have been victims of incestuous molestation at home. While the cameras are on me, I'd like to make another plug. You were saying about any resistance from the public. We've been very involved with an awareness program, but where we have reached resistance is on the primary schools. And this is very unfortunate, because that's where we should be. This is where it's happening, at the primary school age. And that's where we really need to get in.
Are churches involved in this at all?
We've had quite a bit of cooperation with Latter-day Saints, and also some of the local churches. Some of the pastoral ministers and counselors are very interested in this. And they could keep a sharp eye, but I think Gene is right. The teachers can tell when a youngster is off course, and they should learn how to probe in a general way.
How do they spot this?
Well, sometimes a student might be okay, and she may operate quite successfully in school, and then suddenly she starts deviating. She either withdraws or becomes hyperactive. In other words, the teacher can tell if that youngster isn't on course. And I think that sometimes sitting her down, because it's very obvious a youngster is terribly disturbed, terribly confused. And if they just become sharper and more perceptive, they can pick these out.
I wanted to add, too, related to the resistance. I think there's not as much resistance as there used to be, but there is still quite a bit among the professional people who are supposedly there to help, too, mental health people and physicians. We don't want to believe the magnitude of the problem. You know, you mentioned earlier at least 1 in 4 of all females. Well, I think that's low. And why is it that our society allows that number of children to be used in that way? There's something, you know, very wrong here in terms of how we've looked at this problem. We're very confused as a society about sexuality versus sexual exploitation.
I think very important on this subject, too. We think of the child molester, and everybody has an aversion to this. But unfortunately, we confuse the incestuous molester with the pedophile. And when in actuality, this 1 out of 4 that we're talking about, 75% of those victims are victims within the home, not by the pedophile, not by the predator. We are molesting our own children. This is what's frightening.
So the biggest single component of sexual abuse is incest.
And the most destructive. I would say the most destructive.
What is the damage done?
Well, we did indicate before that, 70–80% of prostitutes were incestuously assaulted.
Well,
drug addictive. Well, let me, this is what happens in the child and happens even the offender. If you don't, if you're not sure in your father's love or your mother's love, your emotional underpinnings are destroyed, and you don't feel low self-esteem, you feel self-hatred, because you feel that my mother doesn't love me, my father doesn't love me, and if beyond that my father exploits me, your whole personality is warped. So you actually court situations which will be rejecting or disastrous, and you'll find that the history goes through elementary school, high school, and eventually promiscuity, drugs, and then they might abuse their own children.
And there are a lot of women who don't necessarily act out in that way. They might not have as serious problems that are visible to the public, such as prostitution, but they have interpersonal relationships that have extreme effects on their personal lives.
I think we saw that.
They're non-orgasmic.
Not only the utter destruction of the individual, but let's bring it home to the people where there's something they can understand. Literally, millions of dollars a year that's lost to the American people by the destruction of this, and yet all of our governments are cutting out these programs, something that we really need.
What you're also saying in the moment we have left, if I read all of you correctly, is that there is a way back for these people.
There's a way back, but there's a criminal neglect. Look, we as parents, we really, I'm talking as parents now, we have to be concerned about our children. We have to be concerned about especially our daughters who are being molested.
Dr. Giarretto, Ms. Stevens, Sergeant Brown, thank you very much for being with us on Directions.
Thank you, Herb.
Monday on ABC.